Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Megan Preston Meyer. She is here to celebrate Supply Chain Clears the Way. Before we invite Megan into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by our Lunar New Year, celebrating Lunar New Year in Asian communities by YoBQ. You know, the Lunar New Year, many people refer to it as Chinese New Year. It's just a few weeks away. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the Lunar New Year, it's celebrated by communities all over the world, not just in China. And it's celebrated in many different ways. Our Lunar New Year gives you a peek at how the Lunar New Year is celebrated in Chinese families, Korean families, Thai, Vietnamese, and Indian families. It's a beautiful, beautiful book that celebrates diversity and also celebrates the bond that every human being has. What a great new way for your family to celebrate. Celebrate the Lunar New Year and add our Lunar New Year by YoBQ to your family library. Join us right now from the beautiful nation of Switzerland. Our guest today is here to celebrate her wonderful picture book series. It's called Supply Chain and Fifo. Please welcome to the show, Megan Preston Meyer. Hey, Megan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Third time's the charm. It always works.
Excellent.
We just had a few mix-us up here in the introduction, but we're excited to learn more about Supply Chain and Fifo. What are these books? You have two new picture books out, Supply Chain Clears the Way and Fifo Saves the Day. Why don't we start with Supply Chain? Tell us who she is and what she's all about, please.
Supply Chain is a plucky, purple-haired heroine who helps, or with the help of her canine companion, Fifo, helps hapless grocery store owners or manufacturers solve supply chain or operations management issues. So, yeah, like you said, it's a little non-traditional. There's not a whole lot of supply chain focused books on the market right now, but Supply Chain is, I like to think, the top of that market.
You know, as far as I know, you're the only book that I've come across, only picture book that I've come across that talks about the supply chain, but it's certainly needed right now. I don't think anybody thought of this thing called the supply chain until the last few months.
Exactly. It's one of those things where it happens. Supply chain, the concept of supply chain management and the way that goods move from point A to point B underlies everything that we see or do. You know, every time you go shopping, those goods had to get there somehow. But we never ever talk about it. We take it for granted until something goes wrong. And that's happened, unfortunately, quite a bit this year.
Yeah.
So there's lots of publicity, but not always good.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that people would be really surprised about is I always had this idea that, you know, the truck pulled up to the supermarket once a month and they unloaded a big truckload of Snapple or Chips Ahoy cookies. And so there is just this endless supply of Chips Ahoy in the back of the supermarket. So when that section of the market of the shelves emptied out, you just pull out some more. But it's a lot more complicated than that. Things are kind of there daily. There's not a big stack of stuff in the back of the supermarkets anymore, right?
Right. Especially if you're talking about supermarkets, so much of the food that we buy is perishable. It doesn't have, month-long or 6-month-long shelf lives, especially the fresh food. So they literally can't just keep a big store of it in the back room. And coupled with that, there's been trends in the last probably decade, really, moving more towards just-in-time delivery so that retailers and grocery stores don't have to hold the inventory. They would much rather have the truck pull up every single day. Then they don't have to store it and manage it and keep track of everything. And so we've been moving more and more towards a fairly fragile supply chain in a lot of ways. And we're seeing that all sort of fall apart, or we have seen that fall apart. It's now luckily getting put back together again.
Yeah. So, we talk to parents and caregivers and grandparents and teachers and other authors here on the podcast. And we'll get into a little bit deeper dive about your picture books. But since we have you here, and this is such a topical subject and something that most people don't really have a good grasp on, and probably like a lot of us when we were 12 and 13, we figured, everybody else knows about this stuff, so I'm just going to pretend that I know about it. I'm not going to ask questions. I think that's what's going on with the supply chain thing is everybody else knows why things are breaking down right now. I don't want to look stupid and ask questions. So let me look stupid and ask the questions. What's going on? What had been going on? Why all of a sudden are we going to the supermarket and we're seeing bare shelves?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons that are all sort of compounding, and they're all kind of happening at different points in the supply chain. And one way to think about it is it's really a step-by-step process. Let's use Chips Ahoy as an example. They are baked in a factory, and that could be anywhere within, let's say it's in Chicago. And then those cookies, once they're manufactured in Chicago, they have to get to San Francisco. And so for that to happen, there's so many little tasks that have to happen at a certain time in a certain order. So the cookies are baked. They have to be put onto a truck in Chicago. That truck needs to drive to San Francisco, which takes, a couple of days at least. Mm-hmm. Then they usually go to a distribution center. The truck from the factory doesn't go directly to the grocery store. So they'll be taken to kind of a central distribution center. And then from there, the cookies will be put onto another truck to go to the grocery store. And within that switch, within that distribution center, for one thing, there's somebody whose job it is to make sure that they've bought enough packages of cookies from the factory for all of California, for instance. And then, and they base that number, the amount they buy, off of purchase patterns in the past. And then once they have, say they have 1,000 pallets of cookies, they have to distribute those to each individual grocery store. One grocery store might get 5 pallets, one might get 1 pallet, one might get just, 10 pallets if it's a Costco. And so that calculation has to be correct. They have to know how many cookies go to each place. And then there's another truck. Like I said, that truck has to get to the right grocery store. That grocery store then has to unload the cookies, get it on the shelves, and assume that the people who have bought 2 packs of cookies every week for the past 3 years are going to continue buying 2 packs of cookies. And so within that process, there's lots of places it could break down. If somebody goes to the store and sees that there's not nearly as many cookies as there usually are, they might decide to buy 8 packs, so they know they've got their cookies for the next month. But the person who was stocking those shelves didn't count on that sort of demand, and so they didn't buy enough. That means they have to order more, and it compounds. It gets worse and worse every time there's a little tiny hiccup. If you amplify it over the entire supply chain, we end up with empty shelves, like you said.
Yeah. So how do we take this, what really is a fascinating science, and I'm thinking logistics is a science, and how do you take that science and translate it into a picture book?
It's a challenge, but it's really, really, really fun. And so that's what I've tried to do with both Fifo Saves the Day and Supply Chain Clears the Way. Because you said logistics is a science, and it absolutely is, but it's not rocket science. I like to say that the concepts in supply chain management, operations management, logistics, they're common sense. They're just not common knowledge. I mean, there's nothing really, really hard to understand here. It's all one very nice thing about this whole field is that it's so very tangible. We're not talking about abstract, technical, like computery things. You can picture a box of cookies on a truck. Mm-hmm. And so these concepts are, if you can simplify them to the point that you can put them into a story, they're very easy to grasp. It's just a matter of choosing the right illustration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that, I heard many, many years ago, somebody talk about how many people are involved in me getting that package of cookies or whatnot. And I was blown away. You know, the idea that I just go and buy, so it's me, the guy who puts it on the shelf, maybe the person who bakes it, and then me. But there are a myriad of people in between those different steps. And I personally think I started sharing that with my kids. And I think that that's something really valuable to talk to our kids about, this idea that we're living in a world, and we've talked here in the podcast about people being so fractured and polarized, and that certainly is happening right now. But the reality also is that so many people are working together to make our society work. And I think that's a great message to share with our kids.
It really is. It really is. There is so much cooperation that's necessary, and that the fact that there are cookies on the shelves proves that, like you said. And it's so much more we can talk about polarization and division all day, and a lot of other forms of media do. But really, there's so much good work that goes on, and just people doing everyday things, and life is still for most of us functioning really well. And I think looking at widening that perspective and thinking about, when something shows up on your dinner table, all of the people and all of the steps and all of the entire process it took for it to get there. It not only, it shows that cooperation is going on, helps us to be grateful for all of the people involved in this process, and does form that connection to something greater than just, ourselves and our little household.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. When I've had many conversations with kids, and after my educational magic shows, and kids would come up to me and go, "Oh, is magic real? You can do magic. Wow." And I always say to them, I goes, I'm doing tricks. I learned something that you don't know, and I can do a trick, and it looks like magic, but you have something in your pocket that's really magic. You have this device in your pocket that hundreds of people have come together to make work, and then another couple of thousand people work together to make function, so that you get this thing in your hand, and the signal is going out, and it's going everywhere, and you're able to communicate with anybody, anywhere in the world. You and I, you're in Switzerland, I'm in Boston. We're talking, we're looking at each other. This is magic. And it's all happening because of that cooperation that we were just celebrating.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in this?
Well, I spent, before I became an illustrious author, I say very sarcastically, I spent 10 years in the corporate world working in these types of jobs. I worked in supply chain and supply chain adjacent roles, and then moved more towards analytics towards the end of my corporate life. And I realized I was always super deep into data. So I had spreadsheets. I was the data girl. And then I realized data is great. It's absolutely necessary for a lot of business decisions to get made, but data doesn't tell the whole story. And so I started becoming more and more interested in the stories that data doesn't tell, and how we can communicate, just like we're talking about some of these concepts, more, how we can tell them more as stories, because as humans, we react a lot better to a story than a spreadsheet. No amount of numbers is really going to, numbers are important, but we need that emotional pull too. And so one of the ways that I've found to take some of these more complex messages and simplify them, making them more fun and engaging, is through Supply Chain and Fifo, because I know that kids are reading them, but I also know a lot of, probably a third of the book sales go to people who don't have kids at all and just think they're kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely pick up Supply Chain and Fifo before I pick up, a textbook about supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. And that's precisely my goal.
Yeah. I think that this is so important, because I think it's important for us to understand, and it's important for our kids to understand how the world works.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have a lot of authors who listen to the show, and a lot of authors have, and it's happened to so many books, their launch date has been pushed back months at a time. I've had one author's book was pushed back a year. What's going on, and do you know what's going on in the world of publishing that's and what's going on in the supply chain that's pushing all these release dates back?
A lot of it again comes down to transport. I know I published Supply Chain Clears the Way in July of this year, and my original print date was pushed out a week, which was, in terms of what a lot of authors are going through, nothing. Mm-hmm. But it was pushed out a week because the print shop couldn't get the paper. The publisher couldn't get the correct weight of paper. And that was because they imported it from, I'm not sure if it's China, but they imported these huge reams of paper, and those you can't just stick on, you can't just send through the mail. Like, those come on the boats, mm-hmm. like we've seen the ones that get stuck in the canals. Mm-hmm. And so once again, any little hiccup there is going to have ramifications up the supply chain. Yeah, absolutely. So tell us just quickly, because this has been fascinating, but tell us a little bit about the story behind Fifo Saves the Day, and then also about Supply Chain Clears the Way. Yeah, so Fifo Saves the Day is, that was the first book, and in it, sorry. So Fifo Saves the Day, that was the first book. And in it, Supply Chain and Fifo help out a grocery store owner. This grocery store owner sells dragon eggs. I always forget to mention that the books are full of dragons, which I think dragons help to explain anything, make anything more fun, but especially supply chain concepts. I think dragons fit really well. So the grocery store owner sells dragon eggs, but he doesn't rotate his stock correctly. And so the dragon eggs that have been on the shelf for weeks start to hatch. And so Fifo and Supply Chain have to come in and save the day. Very cool. Yeah. And then Supply Chain Clears the Way teaches kids about bottlenecks, which is the topic we've been discussing, the supply chain bottlenecks. This one is actually focused more on manufacturing bottlenecks, but it's the same concept. There's a spot along a process where things slow down. And so Supply Chain goes to visit her Uncle Manny at his dragon food factory. And Uncle Manny is upset because his factory is not producing to the capacity that he would like. And so Supply Chain and Fifo, once again, do some investigation, find out where the bottleneck is, and then help to clear it so that the factory can be more efficient.
Wonderful. This is such a great series, I think, and important. And I think there are so many lessons and so many conversations that can spring. We always talk about, what kind of conversations can a family have? I think that this is, talk about an ongoing conversation. After you read Supply Chain Clears the Way or FIFO Saves the Day, going into the supermarket and just seeing that empty shelf. What do you think happened? How could FIFO save the day? What do you think may have gone wrong? Where was the bottleneck that, is causing the shelf to be empty? That would be a really, really fun thing, I think, for families to talk about.
I think so too. I hope so, because that's precisely the types of conversations that I would love to have started.
Yeah, wonderful. What's coming in the future, provided there's no bottlenecks in your imagination?
Well, I've got plans for the third Supply Chain and FIFO adventure, and that one is going to be focused on this concept of the bullwhip effect. And that's something that we're just starting to hear about in the news now.
Okay.
The bullwhip effect it's basically about communication discrepancies along the supply chain. So if we go back to our early example about the Chips Ahoy cookies, if we start having people who are buying 8 packs at a time instead of 2 packs at a time, the people in charge of purchasing are going to freak out, and they're going to think, oh my gosh, demand has gone up so high. I better order twice as much as I used to. And then the distribution center will have to order twice as much as they used to. And then the factory down the line will have to be working overtime. They'll produce so many cookies, but then at some point, that demand isn't really, the person who is purchasing 8 packs of cookies at a time was reacting to something. They're not going to purchase 8 packs of cookies every week for the rest of their life. And so at some point, this discrepancy in the demand that's requested at the point of retail and the manufacturer is going to catch up. There's going to be too many cookies being produced, and then there'll be warehouses full of cookies just languishing somewhere. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So somehow I don't have the text finished yet, but I need to couch that in the world of dragons, and then we'll see how it turns out.
Interesting. I can't wait to see how that turns out. As you were speaking, I thought, what a great way to talk to kids about not overreacting. And, because we all remember, we ran out of toilet paper last year, and I didn't understand why. When I heard that the Australians were running out of toilet paper, I'm like, why? And then it happened here, and it's like, oh, because everybody's buying big cases of toilet paper and they're sleeping on it or something at home. I don't know where they put it on. But I think that there's a way that we as a culture can sit down and not only think about our own needs, but also think about how our actions affect others and not overreact, and not, as the mayor of Boston at the time said, not fill your basement with cans of chicken noodle soup.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, Megan, where can people go to find out more about Supply Chain and FIFO and find out more about you?
The easiest place is to go to www.supply-jane.com. And you can find information about the books. You can find information about me. The books are also available on Amazon. So you can just search for Supply Jane on Amazon. But supply-jane.com is probably going to be the one-stop shop.
Yeah. And I didn't even get into how amazed I am that I can go on my computer and go to Amazon or Target and say, yeah, I want that. And it's at my door like tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm
yes.
Like, how did that happen? We'll talk about that the next time you come on.
All right.
All
yeah,
right.
That sounds great.
We've had a wonderful, really fascinating time speaking to the author of Supply, Jane, and Fifo, a great series for kids and for adults. And we've been speaking with the author, Megan Preston Meyer. Hey, Megan, thanks so much. This has been a blast.
It really has. Thank you.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Alice Faye Duncan. She'll be here to celebrate Opal Lee and what it means to be free. Opal Lee is known as the grandmother of Juneteenth. This is a fascinating episode. You do not want to miss it. If you are an author and are frustrated at how hard it is to let people know about your great children's book, we can help you. The Reading with Your Kids podcast has so many ways to help you celebrate your book and let families know that they should consider it, adding it to their family library. You can be a guest on the podcast and sit down and tell me and tell the world all about your fantastic book. It's fun, it's easy, and it doesn't cost a thing. You can also submit your book to our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. And if our panel believes that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. And with that status comes a number of really powerful tools that can let parents know that your book is worthy of their consideration. And we are so excited. We launched our monthly promotion program back in November. And every month it's been sold out. Authors love it. They love the fact that we'll celebrate their books through commercials here on the podcast. Celebrate your book through messages to our 66,000 plus social media followers and display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. You can learn all about these various services by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page and scroll on down to the various services. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Megan Preston Meyer. Be sure to check out her books. Learn all about this thing called the supply chain. Also want to thank our sponsor, YobiQ. Be sure to check out our Lunar New Year. Lunar New Year, it's right around the corner. This is a great, great book to have in your family library at this time of year. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.